Welcome to this episode of Ridin Horses. We're out here today. I'm on Piper. This is our barrel prospect. She's been setting for a while this summer. I haven't been on her a whole lot, but she's about as close of a horse that I have to show the topic that I want to share with you guys today, which is just the concept of babysitting your horse. And one of the biggest ways that I see people feel like they have to babysit their horse is mainly trying to control the hip. And I'll allude to that a little bit more once we get going. But if I think about this concept of babysitting and what I don't want to create in my horse, I don't want my horse doing things that I have to constantly counteract. I want my horse more in a frame of mind to where they only do something when I ask for it. So if the hip's moving and I didn't ask for it, that's something that I want to address in a manner that doesn't come across as if I'm babysitting, but puts more emphasis on my horse to kind of change his train of thought and be more focused on leaving that hip still versus just constantly moving it all the time. So the number one place that people are going to struggle with this is mainly just getting their horse where you can bend him a little bit, and that horse learn how to bend his body and keep driving with his hindquarters and not be swinging the hip to the outside unless you ask for it. So what you're going to find is if your horse isn't soft, and you see this a lot, I have seen this a lot in barrel horses that aren't really soft when you bend their body, rope horses that aren't very soft when you bend their body. If you bring their nose that far, the hip wants to just swing to the outside. So this mare, with the idea of us trying to make her into a barrel horse, I need this mare where she can make a really tight turn and have some bend in her body and keep this right here underneath her and not swinging it to the outside to where I feel like I have to use my outside leg to keep that hip pushed back over there. So if I had her in this position, I'll stop so the camera can see here. If I had her in this position and the hip was swinging out here and I wasn't asking for it, I see a lot of people, and I watch a lot of people at my clinics try to keep that hip over there with their foot back here in position 3. And I'm not against moving the hip around off position 3. In fact, we're going to do that a lot. But I don't want my horse to where when I've got him moving here, if I roll this mare up to a trot right here, she's getting better. She'll still do it a little bit, but I'm gonna basically cause it a little bit today so you guys can see the idea. Now this is a pretty tight little circle right here, but the idea of her being able to drive with the hind feet right here and not swing her hip out. I feel her a little bit dropping her shoulder some, but we're going to work on that issue as we get our horse to where they're not swinging that hip out so much. Okay, so I'm going to use my inside leg. Right there, you see that hip swinging out. Now I pushed the hip out right there. Okay, that wasn't my horse swinging it out on her own. So instead of me, come back around here to the camera again, instead of me trying to stop that with this foot, if that hip moves without me asking for it, what I'm going to try to do is get my horse to think different. Because what my horse is going to do, if they're not soft to where I can bend them this much without the hip going, then as soon as I bring the nose around that much, the hip's going to be swinging to the outside. I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing on this right here. I'm going to pick this shoulder up and I'm going to move the shoulder out here. Now if I stop here, here's where I'm trying to get my horse to make the change. When I pick the shoulder up and move it here, I just moved the hip back over here where I wanted it to be to begin with, where I wanted it to stay when I was traveling in that tight circle, without using my outside leg, but by using this leg in position 1 to move the shoulder over here. So what I'm going to try to do is, if I think of it as a counter bend, I'm just going to practice that concept of a counter bend so much that my horse is more prepared See right there, the hip's kind of moving out just a little bit, where my horse is thinking more and more prepared to move the shoulder over here than she is to swing her hip out. But again, in this situation, the hip has moved back over here simply because I moved the shoulder so far here to the right. Now there's places here where this mare, she's not as soft as she's gonna be. There's places where she leans on my leg a little bit. She's a little bit more resistant here on the left than she is to the right, so I'm gonna go a little bit more here to the left. So I'm just gonna bring her down here in a really tight circle. Now you guys see the position of my hands here. And I'm just gonna pick her up right here and move the shoulder. Now I can almost look at it like this. If I was gonna ask for a left lead departure right here, I'd need to move the hip over here to the left as I'm headed this direction to pick up the left lead. But if I'm on a really green horse and I don't have much hindquarter control, I can often take their shoulders, and instead of moving the hip over here off of my outside leg, all I'm doing is taking the shoulder and moving it over here. And if I don't move the hip, then when the shoulder gets here, that leaves the hip right over here where I would need it to be for that left lead departure. It's just another way that I can set that lead up. What I'm trying to get you guys to understand today is all these places where I'm trying to hold that hip is because I'm not building the frame of mind of my horse to think of it different. If every time I bent her this much, she was thinking that, or she was at least ready to give me that, she wouldn't be swinging her hip to the outside. So I'm going to have to adjust my train of thought here a little bit as far as how I'm going to approach it. Because if I'm sitting on a horse that has a tendency to swing their hip out, and I've been riding them trying to keep that hip pushed back to the inside where they can keep driving with it with my outside leg, it might be as much of a habit for me as it is my horse. She feels a lot better here to the right. Well, again, that right there is a pretty good picture of, I've got the hip to the inside. If I was going right, setting that horse up for that right lead departure, but see, I was just traveling in a right circle right there. I come out of it just to move the shoulder over here. But again, I'm just trying to create in this mare where she's more willing, or let me rephrase that, where she's more prepared to pick that shoulder up and move it over. Thank you. Now I'm going to get kind of long on my reins right here. Let you guys see something here. If I'm long on my reins like this and I go to pick her up, makes it a whole lot easier for my horse's head to come up. This mare, I don't worry as much as I used to about my horse's head position, because I'm getting a little bit better at my approach. But I think more than anything, I can help one out a bunch just by getting short on my reins like this. I'm not pulling, but I'm short enough. You see how that rolls that horse up in that bridle, just being short where my hands aren't way up here. See where my hands are way up here versus down here like this? So my right hand is really going to have to help, because this mare isn't far enough along where I can just pick her up with my left rein right there consistently. There's places in this circle here where I could, but then there's going to be places like right there I'm going to really have to help with that outside rein. We'll get back here in a really tight circle again. So that feels pretty good right there. And then again, I'm just going to come out of it like this just to make sure she's ready for this. Then we'll flow down here with a little tight circle to the right. So again, you see my hands here. I'm not up here like this. I'm going to be like this. I don't have to pull on my horse. All I got to do right here is just hold that position. And I'll come out of it right here. I'll go ahead and go from the trot to a walk. Most of the time in the beginning, I might have to slow it down like that right there from the trot to the walk, just to help my horse find that lateral there with the shoulder. Because if you've got a horse that you get them bent this much and they're really bad about swinging that hip out, and you're trying to change it all at the trot, and the more you're trying to keep that hip inside, the more they lean and push on you, the worse it's going to get. But if I'll bring them down to a walk right there, I can slow things down enough, help them find that a whole lot easier. So I guess really what I'm saying today is, guys, I'm talking about babysitting the hip, but it really boils down to this, which is way back at the beginning. How soft is my horse just from here to here? Okay. That doesn't feel too bad at a standstill, but it could be a lot better. So I know once I get the feet moving, there's going to be a little bit more resistance there. So I've got a lot of work yet to do with that. But while I'm trying to get that horse soft or lateral, if that hip is swinging to the outside at all, I'm going to basically counteract what that hip's wanting to do by saying, okay, if you're going to swing anything to the outside, I'm taking the shoulder out. Let's go ahead and speed her up here to a lope. I'll try to get her on a pretty small circle here at a lope, with a lot of bend in her body. That really feels pretty good there to the right. She comes down to a trot. We'll go ahead and move her out here at a trot. So as she came around there, you saw her head come up pretty good. That's really just the difference between a trot and a walk. So I'm going to slow down one gait from the lope to the trot. So you guys can watch when I come around to the camera, you can watch my outside leg and see that I'm not using my outside leg at all to try to keep that hip from swinging to the outside. I'm focusing more on the front end. Okay, so I'm gonna bring her down now to a walk. And I'm gonna ask the hip to step to the outside. So I'm gonna add a lot of bend in her body, but I'm gonna take my inside leg right here and push position 3 and ask that hip to step out. I'm not saying that I don't ever want that hip to move to the outside. All I'm saying to my horse is, don't move it until I ask for it. So that bend right there is not enough for that hip to move. I have to add my foot. That's where I want my horse. That's the frame of mind that I want my horse in. Okay, so there's a couple times of me bending her in a pretty tight circle, asking the hip to step out. Now I'm gonna go back to a lope, and let's see if that causes any trouble. Probably what I feel more than anything right there is there's places where she's dropping her shoulder a little bit. She's not trying to swing that hip to the outside at all. So what I'm saying today, what I'm working on to make sure this isn't swinging to the outside and I have to babysit it and hold it from swinging out there, is also going to work on this mare right there when she's trying to drop her shoulder. That's really all I'm doing, guys. If I pick this mare up like this, I'm just picking that left shoulder up and I'm sending it that direction. But again, in this position right here, let's say I wanted the hip to come over here to the right. If I just simply pick this horse up and move that shoulder over here, now I've got the hip over here to the right. Okay? But it boils back down to, will my horse let me bend their body and not feel like, because they're braced somewhere between their ears and their tail, to where when the nose comes around far enough to the left, all they're saying is the hip has to go. How long am I gonna have to be out here working on this? How many times am I gonna have to pick up on this horse before I can get this horse in that frame of mind where I feel like the hip's gonna stay there regardless, unless I ask it to move? That's probably gonna depend on what kind of habits you've already created. If you're riding some 11-year-old barrel horse that you really haven't taken this approach on at all, you've just been trying to get through a barrel pattern and you don't have much willingness in that horse to bend her body, and that hip really wants to swing out, you're probably gonna have to work at this 10 times more than I'm gonna have to with this mare. This mare's still pretty green, but when we got her and we started riding her, she wasn't at a spot where she had a bunch of bad habits. She was just green to the point where she didn't have many rides before she got here. Let's go back and lope another circle here to the right. Try to get her pushed up in that bridle a little bit with a little bit more bend. And see, I'm using both legs here, guys, to drive her forward. But I have the freedom right there to use my inside leg in position 2. Have to bump her off my leg a little bit right there. She's just leaning on it. I have the freedom there to use my right leg in position 2 in conjunction with my left to keep her rolled up in that bridle and keep her driving forward without her swinging that hip out. But I think that's also going to come into the idea of I need to make sure that I've got good placement with my feet where my horse can differentiate where those spots are. If I'm back here right in front of my back cinch, I want that hip to go. Now, after I've worked at this for a while, here's another place I'm going to notice this is going to help me. If I've got a horse that I'm trying to get them to turn around, I'm not just trying to go in a circle, but I'm trying to get them to turn around or to spin, and they have a habit of wanting to swing their hip out. This concept is going to help a lot with that as well, because again, it's trying to build a frame of mind in your horse. I need the freedom to draw on this inside rein a little bit to get my horse to step into that turn if I need to. But again, if that bend in that horse's body is causing that hip to swing out, then it's going to be tough for me to feel like I can use this without something coming up in that turnaround that I didn't want. So the more I work at this, the more I notice my turnarounds get better to the point where I don't ever have to worry about my horse's hip swinging out until I ask for it. So I'm not out here doing this. I'm not out here, the hip just swung out right there, I'm going to push it back. So I'm trying to bend her again to the left, the hip swings out, I push it back. The hip swings out, I push it back. I'm not playing that game. I'm going to switch my focus to the front end, and I'm just going to try to create a different frame of mind in my horse. That right there feels really good. We'll go ahead and come all the way to a walk. Leaning on my leg a little bit right there. So you guys are going to notice that my horses are going to get really, really good, because I'm going to work on this a lot, at being ready to move that shoulder there. This mare, I'm not going to say she's really, really good yet, but she's going to be. We just haven't ridden her enough yet. But again, that right there, put the hip over here. Might roll her back into this. I'm going to take my left rein just to get her stepping, then I'm going to pick this rein up and ask her to step over there. All that stuff in my hand, through that bridle right there with her head, was just her not getting off my leg. Thank you. So I'm just out here riding around, guys, trying to figure out what's going on in my horse and whether or not I created it. And if I'm doing something that's created a train of thought in my horse to where I'm getting something I'm not asking for, instead of just trying to fix the symptom or just get that hip to move back over, in my mind, I'm thinking I need to be more focused on this horse's frame of mind. And if I could get my horse to think different when I pick those reins up, then I wouldn't have to babysit at all. The problem with babysitting is it seems like once you start, you're doing it all the time. Then you're trying to figure out how to do things just to get by that horse trying to swing their hip out. So this little mare is going to have a lot more work to do. But I'm excited about this mare's little future as a barrel horse. I know I've got a lot to learn when it comes to the sport of barrel racing, but my goal is to at least have the brokest barrel horse out there. She's got the breeding, and she's got the potential to go be a nice horse. I'm just going to try to get her as broke as I can and give her as big a chance as I can, as far as it depends upon my ability to teach her how to follow some direction. So you guys think about this concept of babysitting. I'm babysitting in my turnarounds. I might be babysitting in my circles. A lot of people babysit just loping off. by riding the brake, by pulling on the reins. We don't babysit our truck going down the highway. And if there's one spot that I'm babysitting, I'll bet you money that it's gonna drift into another spot. So try to analyze what you're doing, try to focus on what you're doing, and just try to redirect your horse's train of thought to where you don't have that symptom show up anymore. So I hope this is something that'll help you guys. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Riding Horses, and we will see you next time.